The moment the news anchor said, "And finally, a quiet hero retires after 30 years of volunteer service," she nearly changed the channel. But something in the background, a familiar gesture, a profile in silhouette, made her freeze. Then the camera zoomed in. The man being honored smiled softly, his face weathered by time and wind. A thin scar ran from his ear to his jawline. His eyes, gentle, steady, hadn't changed. Her mug slipped from her hands and shattered on the kitchen floor. She couldn't breathe. That was him, the stranger who had carried her through fire and smoke, the man no one believed existed, who never gave his name, who vanished before sirens arrived, and now, years later, he was on TV, like none of it ever happened. But to understand how we got to this moment, we need to go back to the beginning. Emily hadn't planned on staying in the mountains this long. What began as a short break from the city turned into a quiet routine. Morning walks down pine-covered trails, evenings reading by a gas heater, and weekends working the front desk of a sleepy lodge with more empty rooms than guests. The town was small, so small that the post office doubled as a coffee shop, and the only traffic light hadn't worked in 3 years. Emily didn't mind. That was the point. She had come here after losing her sister. A sudden aneurysm, no warning, no goodbye. For the first time in her life, silence felt honest. Her little cabin was plain. A cot, a stove that clicked before it lit, a table stained from water rings. But it was hers. A photograph of her sister Laura sat by the window, smiling, forever, 28. Emily talked to it every morning like it was normal. "Another quiet day," she'd say, setting her coffee down. "You'd hate it here." The truth was, Emily needed the quiet. She needed the routine. She needed to forget the version of herself who had once planned weddings for other people but couldn't plan a life of her own. She didn't go out much. People in town were kind, but not curious. They called her the city girl, even though she'd been here almost 2 years now. One older man, Hank, ran the gas station and always offered her half-price coffee. Another, Marianne, dropped off old paperbacks from the thrift store. It was enough. Her days were measured in cups of tea, chapters read, and the creak of the porch steps. But something had changed that summer. The wind was stronger, the air drier. Everyone felt it. You could smell smoke some days, though no one knew from where. "Too early in the season," Hank muttered, refilling her tank. "But the mountains don't care about calendars." She laughed politely. But later that night, she dreamed of fire. Not flames, but orange skies swallowing the treetops. Still, life went on. Until one afternoon, when the sky turned the color of rust, Emily was hiking a familiar trail, the same one Laura used to tease her about, calling it her widow's walk. It curved along the ridge, then dipped near the creek. But this time, something felt wrong. The birds had gone quiet. The air tasted metallic, and when she reached the clearing, she saw it. A plume of smoke, black, rising fast from the west. She froze. Then her phone buzzed. A local emergency alert. "Wildfire reported near North Ridge. Immediate evacuation advised." She turned around, ran. But halfway back, her ankle twisted on loose gravel. She fell hard, the impact jarring, pain shooting up her leg. She tried to stand, couldn't. She screamed, but the wind swallowed her voice. Smoke thickened. The light turned golden and strange. Emily pulled herself beneath a fallen log, trying to stay low, trying to breathe through her sleeve. She could hear it now, the crackle, the roar, and a sound like trees crying. She thought of Laura, of the picture by the window, and somewhere between panic and prayer, she whispered, "I'm not ready." But no one was supposed to hear, not in the middle of a forest, not in a fire, not when everyone else had already gotten out. Then, footsteps, boots pounding the dirt, a shape, a man, smoke behind him. He didn't hesitate. He knelt beside her, pulled his bandana over her mouth, lifted her like she weighed nothing. Emily tried to see his face. Couldn't. All she saw were his eyes, dark, focused. She reached for his jacket. A patch, faded and burned at the edges. VFD, Volunteer Fire Dept. That's all she knew, before everything went black. Emily came to in a haze of heat and motion. Her head lolled against a broad shoulder. Her body jostled as the man carrying her maneuvered over uneven ground. Everything smelled like ash. The world was orange, not just the sky. The air itself glowed with firelight. Trees flickered like matches around them. The sun was gone, swallowed by smoke. Her vision blurred, but she could feel him. Arms steady beneath her legs and back, breathing ragged but controlled. He didn't speak. Every step he took was deliberate. Downed branches cracked beneath his boots. Fire crackled behind them like it was chasing. Somewhere ahead, a child cried. The man paused, adjusted his grip on Emily. Then he called out, not loud, but firm. "Where are you?" No answer. He moved faster, limps slightly. Emily tried to lift her head, but pain shot through her ankle. She winced. "Almost there," the man muttered, mostly to himself. Through the trees, shadows danced. And then, a child, no older than 8, covered in soot, standing barefoot in the middle of the path, clutching a small dog to his chest. The man set Emily down gently against a mossy rock. "Stay," he said, locking eyes with her for a second. Then he sprinted to the child, scooped him up, wrapped him in his coat, spoke softly, calmly. Emily couldn't hear the words, just the tone, like someone who'd done this before. He ran back, now with both the boy and dog in his arms, set them beside her, shielded them with his own body as wind picked up and sparks flew like angry insects. Emily reached out, touched his sleeve. "Who are you?" He didn't answer, just looked past her, toward something she couldn't see. Then she heard it, a low rumble. Engines, sirens, a rescue crew. The man exhaled sharply. Relief, maybe, or something else. He stood. "Tell them you were near Ridge Trail," he said. "Tell them you fell." Emily blinked. "Wait, aren't you coming?" But he was already stepping back into the smoke. The boy clung to Emily's arm, eyes wide. Within seconds, the stranger disappeared. No name, no thanks, just gone. The fire crew reached them minutes later. An EMT wrapped Emily's ankle. Another lifted the boy. They asked questions. She answered what she could. "I was carried," she said. "A firefighter, I think. But when they searched the area, no tracks, no gear, no man. One rescuer frowned. 'You sure, ma'am? We didn't send anyone that far in. That trail was already marked as inaccessible.'" Emily said nothing. She looked back at the forest, at the smoke curling into the sky like a question. They told her she was lucky, that someone must have found her just in time. She nodded, but part of her wasn't sure she'd been found. It felt more like she'd been seen, and then left behind. That night in the hospital, she dreamed of his eyes, dark, steady, unafraid. She tried to describe them to the nurse, but all she could say was, they weren't scared, not of anything. The fire made the news for days. They called it the Ashpine Blaze. 28,000 acres, 14 homes lost, 3 injuries, 0 deaths. Reporters praised the emergency response, the aerial water drops, the quick thinking of local crews. But no one mentioned him. No photos, no interviews, no nod to a man who carried 2 lives and a dog through flames and vanished before the cameras came. Emily waited for a name, a headline, a hint. She asked the paramedics, the ranger who took her statement, even the boy's parents, who arrived tearful and trembling hours later. "Did you see who brought him out?" They shook their heads. "No one was with him when they found him. He just appeared," Emily pressed. "He was tall, bandana, a scar on his jaw." But no one remembered. Back at the cabin, what was left of it, she searched for anything, a dropped glove, a footprint, an answer. Only scorched earth and ash. She kept dreaming about him, not romantically. There was no time for fantasy and smoke and survival, but viscerally. The way his arms had braced her, the steadiness of his movements, the silence of someone who'd chosen this kind of danger more than once. She sketched him, first the eyes, then the hands, then that patch on his jacket, VFD Volunteer Fire Department. But from where? There were dozens of departments in the state, some registered, some unofficial. She called a few, described what happened, left messages. No one returned her calls. Eventually, people stopped asking how she was doing. The lodge hired someone else. The trail reopened. The story faded, but Emily didn't. She kept the sketch tucked inside a journal she no longer wrote in. She drew the scar again and again, each time sharper, more defined. Some nights, she'd wake up gasping, not from fear, but from the ache of not knowing. It wasn't just about being saved. It was about being carried by someone who expected nothing, who asked for no name, no reward, no recognition. Someone who had seen her in that moment, broken, terrified, and chose to stay. That haunted her more than anything. Why did he help? And why disappear? Years passed. Emily moved back to the city for a while, then left again, drifted from one job to another, always quiet, always a little apart. She told no one about him, not really, except once, during a community art class, she painted the fire, a figure in the background, barely visible. The instructor asked, "Is this a real person?" Emily hesitated. "I think so." That was all she could say. She didn't believe in angels or ghosts, but something about him didn't feel real. Until the night she saw his face again. The night she saw him again, Emily had almost skipped the local news. She was just passing through a small town on the edge of nowhere, staying in a modest roadside inn, a place with paper-thin walls and a tiny television bolted to a dresser. She'd been driving north, following no particular plan. Years had passed since the fire, enough to dull the pain in her ankle, though the scar on her foot still itched when it rained. The sketchbook was always with her, worn, smudged, pages curling at the edges, not because she expected to find him. She'd stopped hoping for that, but because it felt wrong to leave it behind. That night, she sat on the bed eating crackers for dinner, flipping through stations, static, soap opera reruns, infomercials, then a voice. And finally, a local hero retires today after 3 decades of volunteer service. She might have let it play in the background, but something made her look. The camera panned over a modest gathering. People clapped. A small fire station with peeling paint stood behind them. Then it zoomed in, and her breath caught. There he was, older, yes, more lines around the eyes, but it was him. Same steady gaze, same scar along the jaw. He smiled as the interviewer asked something. Emily couldn't hear it. Her heart was pounding too loud. She dropped the crackers. Mute button off. The voice said, "Dedicated years to backcountry rescue. Never missed a fire season, even after the injury in 2017. Emily sat forward. That was the year of the ash pine blaze. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone. She tried to pause the screen. Take a picture. Something. Anything. But the signal dropped. The channel fuzzed. Gone. She stared at the blank screen, stunned. Then she opened the sketchbook, flipped to the eyes, the patch, the scar. It wasn't just a memory anymore. He was real, still alive, still saving people. And he had never come forward. The next morning, she asked the motel clerk where the news station was based. "That's the Channel 8 team from White Hollow, about an hour west," the woman said. "Why? You know someone on TV?" Emily smiled faintly. "Something like that." She drove, heart pounding. In White Hollow, she found the station, showed the sketch to the receptionist. The woman blinked. That looks like Don." "Don," Emily repeated. "Yeah, Don Mercer, retired last week, quiet guy. Lived out in a cabin past Miller's Point. You an old friend?" Emily paused. "Not exactly." The woman scribbled directions on a yellow notepad. Emily held the paper like it might crumble. Don. A name. Finally. The road to Miller's Point twisted through canyons and pine groves, narrowing until the yellow lines vanished altogether. Emily drove slowly. Every bend looked the same. Every tree whispered. The directions led to a small cabin tucked behind a bend in the hill, half hidden by overgrown brush. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. A battered mailbox leaned sideways, the name Mercer painted in faded red. She parked, sat still for a moment. The journal was on the passenger seat, open to the sketch. Her fingers hovered over it. She didn't know what she was going to say, didn't even know if he'd remember her. But her feet moved anyway. The porch creaked under her steps. She knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Then, footsteps. Slow, steady. The door opened, and there he was, older, grayer, but unmistakably the same man who'd carried her through smoke and fire. He blinked. "Can I help you?" Emily tried to find her voice. "I think you already did." He frowned. "Sorry?" She held up the sketch. Let it speak. Don looked at it, long and hard. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but a softness, a weight. "I remember drawing that scar," she said quietly. "The day after the fire." He didn't respond, just stepped aside, holding the door. Inside, the cabin smelled like cedar and coffee. The fireplace crackled. Walls were lined with books and maps. He motioned to the worn couch. She sat, I was on Ridge Trail, she said. Ankle broken, fire coming in fast. Don sat across from her, elbows on knees, listening. You carried me out, found a kid too, with a dog. His eyes lowered. I asked your name. You never answered. I didn't think you'd remember, he said finally, voice quiet, gravel soft. I couldn't forget. He nodded once, looked toward the fire. Why'd you leave? She asked. He shrugged. People get saved all the time. Doesn't mean they want the memory that comes with it. Emily's throat tightened. You got hurt, she added. That scar, it happened then, didn't it? Tree limb. Took a chunk of my jaw, he said, almost offhand. You never told anyone. He gave her a small smile. I didn't do it for a medal. Silence stretched between them. You changed my life, she said. I needed to thank you. He looked at her, really looked. You didn't need to. I did, she said, because no one else believed me. Not fully, not about you. He rubbed the back of his neck. That's how I like it. She pulled the sketchbook from her bag, laid it on the table, page after page, drawings of his face, his hands, that night. I don't know what you carried that night besides me, she said, but I've carried you every day since. Dawn exhaled slowly. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything, Emily whispered. I just wanted you to know. They sat there, two people bound by a moment neither asked for. He reached forward and closed the book gently. Can I keep this one? He asked, tapping the page with the scar. She nodded. When she left, he walked her to the car. Didn't say much. Didn't need to. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror. He was still standing there, the sketch pressed to his chest like something sacred. The drive back felt different. Not lighter exactly, but quieter inside. Emily didn't play the radio. She didn't reach for her phone. She just drove, through winding hills, under a sky beginning to dim. There was no grand speech, no handshake, no closure scripted for a happy ending. But what passed between them, the silence, the seeing, had filled a space in her that had been empty for years. She stopped at a rest area and sat at a picnic table, the wind rustling through dry leaves, opened her journal. For the first time in a long time, she wrote, He remembered me, not with words, but with the way he looked at the drawing. That was enough. At the bottom of the page, she added something she'd never written before. Some people disappear because they need to. Others disappear because they believe the world only values loud saviors. But he was a quiet one, and now I know he was real. That night she stayed in a modest inn a few towns over. In the lobby, a woman was struggling to lift a cooler into her car. Emily watched for a second, then walked over, smiled, and helped. It wasn't much, but it felt like something he would have done. Back at Don's cabin, the fire had burned low. He sat in a wooden chair by the window, the sketch still in his lap. He traced the lines of her pencil with his finger. All those years he'd carried faces in his memory. The girl with the twisted ankle, the boy holding the dog, the ones who didn't make it. He never let himself wonder what happened to them. That wasn't his job. But now she'd come back, not for closure, for gratitude, quiet, honest, the kind that didn't ask for anything in return. He stood, moved slowly to a drawer in the hallway. Inside were dozens of folded letters, some never opened. Thank yous from parents, survivors, volunteers who came and went, but none had ever shown up at his door, until now. He took a pushpin from the drawer and placed Emily's drawing on the wall beside the fireplace. Not high, not in the center, just visible, where the morning light would hit it. Weeks passed, then a month. Dawn didn't speak of her visit, didn't need to, but something in his gait softened. He started showing up at the local training center again, not to fight fires. His days in the field were over, but to teach. He showed rookies how to read the wind, how to listen to a forest. Sometimes, he told a young recruit, you'll save someone who won't know your name. That's the point. The recruit frowned. Then how will they find you? Dawn smiled. They won't, but they might become someone who helps the next person. That's enough. That night, he passed a diner on the edge of town and noticed a woman struggling with a flat tire. He pulled over, quietly helped her change it. She offered money. He shook his head. You'll get your chance to help someone else. She blinked, nodded. As he drove off, a gust of wind lifted dust across the road, and just for a moment, the sky turned the color of firelight. He smiled to himself, didn't say a word, but something in his chest felt lighter, carried, finally. It was spring when Emily returned to the trail. Ash pine had healed mostly. The fire-scarred trees still bore black along their trunks, but green had returned. New shoots, wildflowers defiantly blooming where flame had once ruled. She parked near the ridge, her ankles stiff from the walk, but steady. The ranger at the gate had recognized her name. "You were here. The fire year, right?" She nodded. "I was carried out." He tilted his head. "By a firefighter?" Emily smiled faintly. "Sort of." She didn't say more. At the overlook, the wind was sharp and full of memory. She pulled out a small envelope. Inside it, a photograph of her and her sister Laura, the one that had sat by the cabin window before the fire. And below it, a handwritten note. "To the man who carried me when I couldn't walk, you reminded me that the world still has people who do the right thing, even when no one's watching." She folded it gently and tucked it into a hollow of the ridge rock, sealed it under a smooth stone. No one might ever find it, but it was there, and that mattered. Back at Don's cabin, the fire crackled softly. The sketch still hung on the wall, weathering slightly with time, but no less clear. He didn't touch it much anymore, just noticed it in passing, like an old song that plays faintly in another room. One morning, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, a photo of a smiling little boy holding a sketch pad. A note scribbled on the back. "He doesn't remember the fire, but he draws every day now. Thought you'd want to know." Don stared at the image for a long time. Then, without a word, he walked outside and sat on the porch. The sun was rising over the pines. A fox darted across the far tree line. He breathed deep. Not everything needed to be known. Not every story needed retelling. But sometimes it helped to be reminded that the smallest acts, carrying someone, shielding a child, saying nothing, could echo through years, through lives. Emily eventually settled again. Not back in the city, but near enough to trees and trails. She never told many people about what happened. But sometimes, when someone looked lost, when she saw a mother wrangling 2 kids, or a man sitting alone on a bench with nothing in his hands but time, she sat beside them, asked if they needed anything, and if they said no, she stayed a moment longer anyway, just in case, because she understood now. Sometimes, we don't carry people because they're weak. We carry them because one day, they'll carry someone else. Somewhere on a wall inside a quiet cabin, the sketch remains. Eyes drawn in graphite, lines shaped by memory, a name never spoken, but remembered, always remembered.
Love this story? Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.